bunch of different types of those?
There are 6 different types of those.
So it's like glial cells, and then they branch off to 6 different things?
Yes, you got it. Folks, today's lecture is glial cells, and that was an abbreviation for what? Yes. Yes. Neuroglia, or literally translated nerve glue. So there are several different types of those, and the way they divide out is basically there's cells that only exist in the central nervous system and cells that only exist in the peripheral nervous system. So in the CNS, includes what 2 things? What comprises the central nervous system?
Brain and spinal cord?
That is correct. So these are cells that are going to be specialists in dealing with the brain and spinal cord. So we need to take a look at some of these here. Now these are not just like, oh, it'd be neat if we had those. Your brain and spinal cord and your other nervous cells are absolutely dependent on these to function effectively. First one is this guy, microglia. Microglia, or microglial cells. They're little. How do you know that?
Micro.
There's a micro in their name. And they look like little snowflakes. Okay. Their job is very simple. They eat debris, which is debris for people who can read. This right here, the word debris means like junk and waste products and stuff like that. So they are the trash removal service for the brain and spinal cord. Now, when things like we saw last semester when we saw the cadavers in St. Louis, that brain that you viewed that had a chunk that was missing from having a stroke, after that brain tissue died, these cells worked overtime trying to remove and break down that material so that there wasn't any dead tissue still remaining in the brain. Okay, so in addition to microglia, one thing we're going to need in the central nervous system that we don't need in the peripheral nervous system is ependymal cells. Ependymal cells. These cells look kind of like a squid. And there's a reason for that too. As you learn from Anatomy 1, form follows function. If it looks like this, there is a reason. Okay? This one's job is to manufacture and circulate CSF, which is a fancy word for cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. Manufacture and circulate CSF. It's really important that they do their job because that CSF's really necessary for reasons you're going to find out in a little bit when we watch a TED Talk toward the end of the hour. But it's kind of like the champagne of the brain. It's like blood is like the commoner's beverage, and then this is only for the elite. It is specially formulated for brain cells to be able not only to handle it well, but to get the nutrients from it, and it helps with cleaning, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But that's the job of these guys. Also, the reason they look like squids is because these little extensions off the end do this. They beat. You see, cerebrospinal fluid, unlike blood, doesn't have something that's shoving it through the body. It doesn't have something that's propelling it. What propels the blood?
Heart.
heart.
The heart does, right. But there is no like heart of the brain that's actually moving this fluid. So the ventricles and open spaces of the brain and spinal cord are lined with these cells, and their little cilia are constantly beating and moving that fluid throughout. And again, we'll talk more about or hear more about that in a little bit. The next type of cell I'd like to talk about is this one here, astrocyte. Astrocyte. And an astrocyte looks a lot like a microglial cell, except it's bigger. Now, at the end of them, you might find these little dudes like that. But they generally don't lay out exactly like that. Their job is to maintain the what? You remember? I'll spot you another word. Blood. Yeah, the blood-brain barrier. That might beg a question. Well, Mr. Helly, doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't the brain want blood? Doesn't it need lots of blood? Yes, it does. But it can't come into direct contact with all of the contents of blood because some of the contents of blood are toxic to the brain. And bear in mind, your brain is basically an electrical organ bathed in a fluid. There's a lot of things that can mess with the electricity of the brain, how cells interact, the chemistry of the brain, and what happens in between the cells. So it's really important that these cells do their thing. And the reason they have these little attachments on the end is because of what they do. Check this out. An astrocyte's job is to reach out and grab a hold of a capillary and surround it so that there is no portion of the capillary that can expose the blood directly to the brain and the brain cells. Another thing you might notice is that if you've ever heard of the names of certain brain like and spinal cord cancers, a lot of times they're named after glial cells, astrocytoma, glioblastoma, things like that, because these are the only cells in the central nervous system that have the ability to divide. Once you're an adult, or even after the first couple of years of life on this earth, your neurons are no longer going to keep dividing. They've done all they can. Okay. It's these cells that are going to keep dividing, and they're the only ones that can cause issues where that's concerned. Okay, so maintain the blood-brain barrier to keep that intact here. The next one, I'm going to try not to misspell, so I'm actually going to look over my arm into the book here. Anyone want to try to say this one? It starts with an O. You remember it from the other day? Oligodendrocyte. Oligodendrocyte. And to me, the oligodendrocyte looks a little bit like the Star Trek ship.
Move it up just a little bit.
Oh, yeah, you bet. It's not... it won't always look exactly like that. Here's the nucleus of the cell. Here it is extending to do this. And if you look at one of those individually, they sort of look like a Schwann cell because they have the same job. These guys, their job is to myelinate CNS axons. You see, there are no Schwann cells in the central nervous system. Schwann cells are all in the peripheral nervous system. But these guys are different because one cell can reach out and myelinate a whole bunch of different neurons. At least two. You can see here's a picture of one, or a cartoon drawing of one right here. It's reaching out and grabbing a hold of this one and myelinating that one, reaching out and myelinating that one, and so on and so forth. And so those cells have the ability to myelinate more than one thing. And form follows function again here. it makes more sense to have these in the central nervous system because all of your neurons are very, very close together there, where in the peripheral nervous system, they're really spread out. Having a cell that could myelinate a number of different ones, not as helpful out in the peripheral nervous system, but here, it's a lot more helpful.
What does that say? Myelinate CNS axons?
Yeah, axons. Mm-hmm.
What does myelinate mean?
Myelinate is a word that means to cover with an insulation. It's got kind of a fatty sheath that helps to insulate basically these biological wires. Yep. Okay. Last two cells here are going to be in the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system, and they are known as. First one is the Schwann cell, and these are in no particular order. That's just the order that I decided to write them in. Schwann cells, and you remember from our drawing on Thursday, Schwann cells, their job is to myelinate. Oh, myelinate. Myelinate PNS axons. And remember, it would wrap around the axon a number of different times, like I tried to illustrate with a pencil in class here. Wraps around a whole bunch of times to insulate those. And finally, say Tellite, satellite. I think that's right. And this is really a cell that's job is to myelinate cell bodies in PNS. And it says in the textbook at ganglia, and what ganglia are groups and bundles of neurons all together. So it will myelinate cell bodies or cover cell bodies.
No pictures for those?
Yeah, I guess I probably should draw that. This one is going to look somewhat like a cylinder with a lump in it. That lump being where the nucleus is, and it wraps around an axon a number of times. Satellite cells, I hate this, but it's really, really similar to both the microglia and the astrocytes. They have these extensions coming off there like that. So, yep, that should just about do it for our glial cells today.